the holodeck from Star Trek where you'd walk in and you could ostensibly walk into a fake world, on the holodeck?
Yes, I loved the holodeck episode.
Yeah, it was always great. There was a couple episodes in Star Trek and in general, more broadly in sci-fi, where someone would figure out that they were in a simulation against their will because a couple key details were wrong. Like someone, either, the magician put them under a spell but got a couple key details wrong and they realize they're under a spell, or they walk into, or they're forced to be in a holodeck and then they realize they're in a fake it's not the fake reality because
something's not right.
Yeah, Data always sips his tea with his left hand, not his right hand, or whatever it is.
Yes.
So I had this happen to me for the first time in my life the other day where I'm sitting, I was like, am I in a simulation? Because I'm sitting on the couch sipping coffee, and for some reason I was thinking about the time that I was living in England. And I lived in England for about 2.5 years, okay? 2.5 years, not a short amount of time.
Right.
I then realized I did not have a single memory, not one memory, of ever getting my hair cut when I was in England. 2.5 years. 2.5 years that I had no memory of ever walking into an English barber, which is a very specific, because I know what an American barber feels like. I know what that looks like. I know all the varieties of how that could play out if I went, anywhere, any city, any neighborhood. I know what an American barber looks like. I have no idea. And I lived there for 2.5 years. And so I say this to my wife. I'm like, am I living in a simulation and I've just figured out that the one key detail is wrong? She goes, you're a dingus. You didn't get your hair cut for 2.5 years because you shaved your head the entire time we lived in England. And I said, wait, no, I didn't. No, that can't be true. By the way, I also said, I have no memory of having a shaved head. And she goes, oh, let's go to the scoreboard. And she gets out this old photo book. She's like, shaved head, shaved head, shaved head. All these photos. Here's me going down the River Cam with a boat. No, there's me bald. Here's me in a Scottish castle, bald. Oh, here's me. A shaved head, 2.5 years. I had no memory, Brad. No memory of this.
We're talking shaved, not you took a clippers to it, but shaved down to the skin?
Not shaved like Telly Savalas. No, I think what it was I had no money when I lived in England, so I had bought like $10 shears, or 10-pound shears. Yeah. And I was like, you know what? I'll just spend £10 once and then never have to spend £10 on all these haircuts. And so I just went for 2.5 years. I had no memory of it. My wife's like, you're such a dingus. You don't remember you were like, you had that dumb haircut for 2.5 years.
So nice. And by the way, thank you for pointing out that it was not like Telly Savalas. I keep wondering, how come we can't get younger people to listen to this show? Telly Savalas, who was significant in 1975. That's your go-to for bald?
Okay, first of all, yes, I'm incredibly old and dating myself, but that's first and foremost. Second of all, top of the head. Name a bald person contemporaneously. Who's a famous bald person right now?
Kingpin was bald. Daddy Warbucks is bald.
Okay, hold on, time out. Kingpin invented in the 1950s or 1960s.
And was
Telly Savalas invented in the 1930s. Or Daddy
Kingpin was the subject of a very popular Daredevil Marvel limited series on TV, and Daddy Warbucks is on Broadway every 6th month over there.
I love how your references are older than my references. Telly Savalas came out in the 70s, Kingpin in the 60s, Daddy Warbucks in the 30s.
40s, yeah. Maybe we're the wrong people for this show.
Honest to God, though, can you think of... Pitbull, I guess. Pitbull is bald, right? I'm trying to think of who's bald.
And you're trying to be hip, too. Okay, famous bald people that are earlier than 1970. Now I'm getting flap sweat. I'm having a hard time thinking of famous bald people. Can you think of a single actor that's
bald?
Bald act. Well, I can think of Mike Tyson because he's got all the face tattoos.
That's a good choice. Mike Tyson's bald. Yeah. And then who's the guy that does? In the Hunger Games he did The Girl on Fire.
You know what? I never saw the Hunger Games.
You never saw the Hunger Games?
No. I had no interest in seeing it. I'm hungry all the time.
Well, what a tremendous peek into the life of Brad Geiger. And on that note, on Dave Kellett never getting a haircut in England? I'm going to say hello, everybody, and welcome to ComicLab, the show about making comics
and making a living from comics. I'm Brad Geiger, the editor of the Webcomics Handbook on Substack and the creator of Evil Inc.
And I'm his pal Dave Kellett, the cartoonist of Drive and Sheldon and co-director of the documentary Stripped.
And this week's Hour of Comics Advice is made possible by your support at patreon.com/ComicLab. So Dave, let's talk comics.
Let's talk comics, my friend. We got a big week because we have really good questions that came in this week that Brad and I are excited about. So let's jump right into them. Brad, what's our first one for this week?
This one comes in from Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson, who is a famous bald actor who says...
The Rock.
Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson. Can you smell what this question is cooking? This comes in and says, I am creating a science fiction Western comic. And
fiction Western comic. Okay, got it.
Sci-fi Western. And my plan as of now is to create 5 30-page comics. So those would be like floppies. And kickstart each comic. Then eventually combine all of them into a graphic novel and kickstart that graphic novel.
Great.
While I am creating these books, I'm trying to build my audience by posting bits and pieces of the art to try to drive excitement. I do not plan to kickstart anything until I have all 5 books done. I see this as a 3 to 5 year endeavor, which will hopefully allow me to build my audience and create a strong story. What are your thoughts on my plan? Thank you both for your time. I appreciate any insight you can afford. Dave, let's talk Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson out of this idea.
I like the phrase, I appreciate any insight you can afford.
Yeah.
Because listen, we're all artists here. We get it. Maybe
that goes back to that old joke about being too poor to pay attention, right?
Yeah, exactly. So I will admit that the thing that threw me is that I do not plan to kickstart anything until I have all 5 books done. And then I started to think more and more about this question, and I realized that a lot of it for me starts to come undone in terms of what sounds at first glance is a passable idea. And I'll tell you what I mean is that if this is going to be a 3 to 5 year endeavor, which is fine, if you have a day job, you're having support, but you're not getting any public feedback, both in terms of emotional reactions and also financial reactions in those 3 to 5 years. So you could commit to a 3 to 5 year project without having any sort of public input based on my reading of how this question is going. Because Brad, am I wrong in thinking that this is not being shared the way they phrased this, not being shared as a webcomic in the interim?
That's how I'm reading it, is that when this person says that they're just sharing bits and pieces, they're not sharing the full page. They're not doing a traditional, what we would consider a traditional webcomic to build up their audience. They're just trying to promote using cropped images and stuff like that to try to build their audience until they go forward with that first Kickstarter. So I got 2 thoughts on that.
Yeah,
and actually, as I'm listening to you talk, I actually realized that, like we kind of discussed this before the show, I'm going 2 different ways. I'll tell you my gut punch on this. And that is, like I said before we turned the mics on, we solved this problem 20 years ago, right? This sounds like a person who might be coming new to comics, who doesn't understand kind of the 20-year history of webcomics, where we proved over and over again that what you do is you build your comic by sharing your work for free on your website, on social media, et cetera, et cetera. And then once you built that audience, then you take them to crowdfunding where you monetize that audience, either through Patreon for ongoing support or a Kickstarter for physical merchandise, which would be your books and so forth. And so my gut is to try to convince this person that they should be doing what we consider to be traditional webcomics. Right? Post those pages, build that audience. You're going to need more than bits and pieces to entice an audience, I think. Unless you're one heck of a promoter, because that's going to get old really quick. Hey, take a look, somebody's hat. Oh, just wait a couple of years, you'll find out who's the head that's under it. And I know it's not going to be that ridiculous, but still, there's not a lot to sink your teeth into, especially for something that what is this plan? This Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson's plan is there 3 to 5 years of this until they go out with the first. So on one hand, I want to convince Dwayne to just please do webcomics. Well, the way we've been talking about them, the way they've existed for 20 years, because that's kind of tried and true. And that's something that we know is going to work. Here's the other thing that I've got, though. And I'm just putting this together on the fly. So tell me whether I'm full of it or not. So, part of it is social media is not great, right? We've been talking about this for a long time now, the decline of social media. And I'm not really, like I said last week, we were talking about kickstarting floppies and publishing floppies. And I'm really not bullish on the idea of floppies.
Right.
However, what we do know is that Kickstarter, out of everything that's going on out there, has the best discoverability and has the best audience retention in terms of persons from your first Kickstarter is going to come along for your second Kickstarter, by and large. So if this person were to launch that first floppy as kind of a loss leader and say, okay, I'm not going to make a lot of money on that first floppy, but I'm going to build my audience and they're going to come around on floppy number 2. Right. And they keep doing that for 5 floppies until they come in with a bang on that graphic novel. And that's where they actually monetize. I think there might be veracity to that plan, ? What do you think?
Yeah, I certainly don't hate that. I agree with you that I do wonder if we've read this wrong, because surely someone would be sharing this along the way, but maybe not. We shouldn't assume so. I mean, the question certainly seems as though they're going to only share it when it's time to release these 5 30-page floppies, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Right. And boy, that's sure hard to entice someone when only bits and pieces have been shown. Yeah. I mean, I can only speak for myself, but my bits and pieces are not enticing to anyone, including my wife. I mean, there's no one wants my bits and pieces.
No one wants those bits and pieces.
I mean, listen, let's just make it very clear. My bits and pieces are appealing to no one. No, but it's hard to get someone emotionally hooked or connected or excited about, check out the gun on character so-and-so. Oh, here's the horse for Bippity Bop. Oh, hey, here's the background scene that you're going to see on page 40. That's like looking at a snippet of a Denny's menu when you're trying to get someone to get excited about sausages. The way to do it is what Costco does. You give them the actual sausage and you say, do you like the sausage? Okay, buy the package. And that's kind of what webcomics do. They go, hey, here's my comic, the actual comic. Here's the page. Here's the next page. Here's the one after that. Hey, are you enjoying it? Great. Join me on Patreon. Hey, would you like to see these 150 pages combined into a graphic novel? Join us on Kickstarter. And like Brad said, it's proven time and time again, and it's a weird imposter syndrome that artists don't think this is true. But it's been proven time and time again that people will pay for a book that they have already read for free online. Yeah.
In fact, they're more likely to do that. And they're more likely to buy it if they've already read it online. They know they're going to like it, and they're buying the archive, as it were.
In a way, it's sort of like rewatching a movie that you saw in theaters. You know you enjoyed it, so you'll rewatch it again,
Right.
And this time, frankly, the experience gets better. A book experience is, by and large, better than a reading experience online or on an iPad. So anyway, long story short, I come down on a version of what Brad is saying. I also think, first of all, I co-sign what Brad is saying. I think release it as a webcomic, collect it as a graphic novel. That's the way you want to do it.
Yeah.
Somewhere around year 1.5, 2 years, you could even start a Patreon before you do the graphic novel, right? I think Brad would agree with that. I would say that if you really were hell-bent on doing a floppy-esque book, I wouldn't do a floppy. I would do maybe... let's see, you have 5 30-page sections, so 150 pages. Maybe I would say every 50 pages or 60 pages, collect a soft cover, like a perfect bound soft cover.
Yeah.
Why do I say that? You can charge a little bit more, and it'll sit on a shelf a little bit better.
Right.
And ostensibly, you could do... hey, it's the first 50 pages collected. Hey, it's the second 50 pages collection. And then you go, hey, it's the full graphic novel. And people were like, well, wait a minute. Where's the final 50 pages? You're like, it's in the graphic novel. There you go, gang. Yeah. And then ostensibly, you've had people bid for or back 166% of the story, if you think about it, because they did the first 50, the second 50, and then the final 150 pages. So... I also co-sign Brad's method. His strategy is probably what I would do, but I could see a world where you kickstarted soft cover, not floppy, soft cover books, right? That were a little more substantive, somewhere in the 50 to 75 page range.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. And what you're saying is basically the tried and the true that we've been relying on for a couple of decades now.
Yeah.
And I don't disagree. I don't disagree with you. Obviously, that's what I do. That's what I'm going to do. That's what I've been doing all up until this point. It's what I'm going to do next year and the year after that. But I think somebody who wanted to use Kickstarter as their main social media, as it were, I could understand if they wanted to experiment with that. And again, take those first few floppies as not exactly a monetization method, but a loss leader. That you're putting those floppies out, but basically what you're doing is using Kickstarter for your audience building.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not something we've talked a lot on this show. And we know that floppies are not going to be a big income generator by and large, just because of the price points and so forth, unless you're really, printing at large quantities. But I can see this idea of using Kickstarter as your audience generator and building it all on that. I don't know that I know enough about it or that I could personally endorse it. But if this person wanted to do that, I would point to them and say, well, I get why they're doing that. I can totally understand why they'd want to do that. I don't know what their chances of success would be, but I do know that I do see a lot of people doing that, or at least it seems as if they're kind of using that kind of model. And so I don't think it's a complete loser idea to do that, right? But I also know that I can't really endorse it from a first person standpoint.
Right. Just to remind folks about the numbers that I often throw out, because I think they're handy to think about. And one of the reasons why I think the webcomics model would work better for you is to get to a final number in your Kickstarter that you want to get to, that'll make it worthwhile and make the Kickstarter worthwhile and the income worthwhile. Here's roughly what you have to think of. You kind of have to go out to and reach 100,000 people via social media, via your website, via your mailing list, via Substack, via all sorts of stuff. You have to go out to 100,000 people so that you can entice 10,000 people to become returning readers, so that you can then further entice 1,000 of those readers, and maybe, frankly, 300 of those 10,000 to become Kickstarter backers of the book, right? Yeah. So your numbers have to go really, really wide. And that's kind of why Brad and I were jokingly saying that your bits and pieces aren't going to do it, because try to entice 100,000 people with bits and pieces, and you'll see that, I mean, as far as extras and bonuses and behind the scenes and little snippets, bits and pieces are fine for an established audience or a growing audience that wants to see a little bit extra or behind the curtain. That's fine on Patreon. It's not how you bring people in the door, though. The way you bring people in the door is with a finished comic. either a finished page, a finished comic strip, a finished page of the graphic novel. And that's how you do it. And you share that on a repeated basis. The word will spread. And then over the course of 3 to 5 years, honest to God, if you've been doing social media and MailChimp and a website and Substack and all sorts of stuff, you will have touched 100,000 lives such that you could entice 10,000 lives to come check out your website, such that you can get 1,000 people who bought in big, or 500 to 1,000 people who bought in big, who will back you on Kickstarter.
Nope. Yeah. And that's what we can recommend.
Yes.
Right?
Yes. That's what we can recommend. Yeah.
That's the one that I know that we can do. Just as the same way as if we were on a holodeck, for example, and we were trying to choose between one or two different ways, we saw the commander, and we looked and we saw that Patrick Stewart already had a whole lot of hair. We'd say, no, that isn't the right Jean-Luc Picard. The famous bald actor Patrick Stewart plays him, and so it's got to be a holodeck. We would know this just from the famous bald actor Patrick Stewart.
That's right. And then we'll feel good about that reference, because we'll remember that when confronting our friend that he had used Telly Savalas as a dated reference, we then went on to use an even more dated reference of Daddy Warbucks. And we're now trying to bury that fact that after having made fun of our friends and was for a 1970s reference, we went with the 1930s reference. Anyway, we'll move on. And here we go. Thank you, Brad and Dave, for your excellent banter and advice. Recently, I've launched my Patreon, and I've been thinking up ideas for exclusives. I've considered creating a binge tier. The idea behind it being that I would put up a 6 months worth of episodes in an exclusive tier for people who like to read everything all at once. It would be a one-time subscription I would have at the beginning of every 6 months. So it would be marked at a much higher price. I'm just wondering, what is your take on this? Brad, as a reminder to all of us of the relevance of Daddy Warbucks, what do you think about this tier? A man who was profiteered off of World War II, warmongering. So there you go, Brad.
Yes.
Oh, no, wait, no, he made profit off World War I.
Yeah, that was Great Depression era, was the original
hell, your
Little
reference
Orphan
goes back to World War I. Daddy Warbucks.
Well, let's talk about this binge tier. In the words of famous bald actor Jason Statham,
I'm enjoying this bit now. All right.
You can't expect Patreon is ongoing support, and you can't expect ongoing support with a one-time reward. It just doesn't work. In fact, we talked about this as early as pro tips number 42. You can go back and listen.
Look at that guy dropping some knowledge. Dang.
Yeah. I did a little show prep today. What can I tell you? You can't expect ongoing support with a one-time reward. You see this all the time. Like, I'll offer a one-time ebook as a sign-up bonus, right? I send out a link to a free ebook in somebody's welcome email they get when they join us on Patreon. But you can't put a one-time reward into your tier, because they're paying month after month after month, and in fact. That's where the revenue is. That's where your career is getting them into that subscription, and then hoping that they stay at that subscription. A $5 turns into $10, turns into $15. Having this one-time binge reward, I think, is a great idea. I love the idea. I think you're using the wrong tool for the job. What I'm hearing is not a Patreon reward so much as it might be, for example, a special piece of merchandise that you sell, or like an ebook, I write straight up download ebook, or it might be a Patreon collection. We see that Patreon has enabled us to sell individual collections now as a separate piece of merchandise. I could see the possibility of this being perhaps a Patreon collection, depending on how you're parceling out that content on Patreon in the first place. I could see a lot of ways to monetize what you're talking about. I think you've got a great idea. I think putting it in a quote unquote binge tier on Patreon is the wrong tool for the job.
Can I ask an ignorant question because first of all, I super agree with you, but can I ask a question of you, my friend, because you always have more Patreon knowledge than I am. Does Patreon even allow for billing at a once every 6 month interim?
No, what this person is going to this person expects if I'm reading this right, this person expects the person to join at that level on Patreon, get the reward, and then they expect them to leave.
Okay, so this.
Because I can't imagine either that or they're fooling themselves into thinking they're going to stay for the next month when they're not getting any reward at that super high level. Right?
Yes. So you've solidified what my answer is, which is that one of the things that subscriptions have going for them as a business model, and this is true for magazines, it's true for Disney Plus streaming, it's true for LA Fitness, sort of gym model, is that because of cognitive load, the average human brain intentionally forgets a subscription once the action is done, because you're like, all right, I'm in. Yeah, it's great. Bring me that magazine. Bring me that gym subscription every month. That's fine. And then you forget about it because you've got a billion other things going on in your life and you don't want to think about it. The problem here is that you're now asking or requiring, actually, this person to remember every 6 months to come back to this model and redo the thing. And then, frankly, you're also asking them a month later to remember to unsubscribe from this thing. So it's just too complicated by half in terms of I like Brad think the idea is brilliant. The core idea is that are there people that love to binge read? Absolutely. I'm one of them. I love to sit down, bang, 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 crank it all out on a Saturday or Sunday morning. I love binge reading in that regard. I'm with you on the idea. Unfortunately, there's just not currently a great way to execute on this aside from an ebook model, I think. What do you think, Brad?
Yeah. No, I think there's more ways to do it than just the ebook.
Okay. Keep going.
Well, I referenced the Patreon collection as an example. That might be another way to do that. But
then they're not reading it ahead of time.
No, it's again, depending on how they're parceling this out on Patreon, it could be they conceivably they could do the same thing in a Patreon collection.
Let's nail down this brass tacks. That would mean you've pre-uploaded the next 6 months, right? You and I both agree on this, the weekly updates for the next 6 months. And then you've gone in and you've highlighted each one of those 26 installments as part of a collection, right? So now there is a collection. Right. And you're saying you could pre-sell something that has not yet appeared on Patreon? Are you sure that's even technically possible?
No, that's where it comes in. It depends on how they're parceling it out on Patreon. If they were putting that out on Patreon, for example, here's
if you wanted, you could do it for stuff that's already appeared, but then it's
right.
But you're saying, I see what you're saying. You're saying you shine the pre-read. This is just, you're going to binge it after when the whole 6 months is done. Is that what you're saying?
Everything is packaged here. And if you wanted to, now here's another way that you could do it. Although I'm not crazy about it, but here's a solution to the problem that you just parsed. You could set up you could make a ridiculously expensive tier that has your 6 month package that hasn't appeared anywhere at all, right? It's like 6 months. It's all of 2025.
Right. Yeah.
And you put it a Patreon tier that's like $100 a month, something no one's ever going to spend. But you upload it. You've got it all ready to go. You put it into a collection and you sell the collection separately for a reasonable price.
Gotcha. So
you could actually get the best of both worlds. And if somebody jumped in for that $100 level, that's up to them. Right. But you still have that all there, and it's there so that later on it makes it very easy for you to put that out to your Patreon backers because it's already uploaded. You just repurpose that into different reward tiers, and you have your ridiculous tier, but then you also have the collection that's reasonably priced that you can sell outside of Patreon as a one-time deal.
Right. I don't hate that idea. That's not bad. No, that's not bad, because then you're in the
Yeah,
meantime,
I mean,
you're also maintaining what would be considered normal Patreon tiers throughout all of that. You know, like, hey, I'm Dave Kellett. I like Brad Geiger's work. Here's my $5 a month to see his weekly output, you know, that kind of thing. So yeah, I don't hate that. That's possible. But let's talk about this.
Although the ebook is smarter. The ebook is smarter. There's no two ways about it.
In general, we're behind you on this. We're trying to figure this out because we like the core idea. There are people that love binge reading. Let me ask you this, Brad, because this is related and not part of their question, but it's fun to talk about for a second. There are cartoonists who have said people love to binge read. They don't love reading in dribs and drabs, right? So instead of releasing my comic in dribs and drabs every week, I'm going to wait 6 months or a year and then drop it all as one big thing on my website. What are your thoughts on that? We haven't talked about that in a couple of years.
I'm not, it was so, I could see a world in which this could work, right? I think you're giving up all the benefits of the drips and drabs, but I could see a world in which that could work if it was really super compelling stuff. The only problem is that you have this big splash and then you've got to wait 6 months until you get your next splash, right? Whereas you could have the best of both worlds if you're putting it out in, again, what you and I would call a traditional webcomic, because, and this is the part that so many cartoonists forget, all that stuff that you put out 6 months ago is still good stuff. And so if you've got, in fact, you should be actively assembling that stuff, packaging that stuff, and you've got lots of content for those people who don't like to read in drips and drabs and who like to read all at once. Those are called e-comics and ebooks, and you should be actively promoting those just as much as you're promoting your new stuff, right? And as a matter of fact, I was telling you a little while ago about Global Comics. I've been really leaning into that, in that I'll say, hey, here's a great way for you to read this chapter of Evil Inc. It's up at Global Comics right now, and you can read the whole thing. And right now, I think I've got 5 different comics that are up on that. And so I'm constantly promoting that. What happens with a lot of cartoonists is that once it's in the archive, we don't want to talk about it anymore.
Right.
You know? And again, go back to that pro tips where I said, you know, choose your words, choose your marketing words wisely, right? If I call this a rerun, nobody's excited about it. But if I just say, hey, here's a chapter of Evil Inc. that was really good because, and again, give them the swig, say why it's good. This is a good story because it had this, that, and the next. Beep, bop, boop. I don't say archive. I don't say rerun. I'm focusing on why that's good. We don't do half as much of promoting our really strong work in the archives as we should. And that's really what you're talking about, right? You can have the best of both worlds. You can do ongoing audience building. At the same time, you can offer your readers a whole lot of stuff that they can read in big packages.
Well, to answer your second part first, I 100% agree. I've been using my archives actually pretty effectively the last couple of weeks, because emotionally starting over on Blue Sky, and let's be honest, I am starting over, has made me realize there's a bunch of people that don't know this older stuff, especially these millions of Brazilians that have jumped onto Blue Sky. And
Brazilians of them.
Brazilians of them. But it's making me reevaluate, like, oh, I've got to slightly tinker with the way I share because like Brad said, it is new to them. Also, it's new to people that have seen it before. They forgot about it. They haven't seen it in 3 to 4 years, of course. So just share it as though it is fresh and new, and go with God. So yes, I agree with you on that. Second of all, to answer my own question about people that cartoonists that we know that have switched to a binge release model, I actually think that it's a bad idea. And I firmly think it's a bad idea, because in the same way that a lot of streamers have gone back to appointment television, like, no, we're not giving you it all at once. Penguin comes out once a week, or this comes out once a week. Right. Because they found out something that they forgot, which is that appointment television builds a deeper and more heartfelt relationship than just binging it all at once and you're done by 3 a.m. that day, you know? So in the same way that streamers have gone back or are going back to a weekly release model, I also think that a cartoonist, a web cartoonist specifically, the relationship that you can build and the emotions that you can elicit from your reader, this is one of the rare cases in life where the parts are bigger than the whole. Do you know what I mean? If you release, if I release Drive in 52 installments rather than one yearly installment, the relationship is better. The emotions are deeper. Because every week I've reinforced their love for the story rather than once in 52 weeks where I release it all and they go, oh yeah, I like Drive. That's nice. Yeah. I mean, think about it in terms of a human relationship. If I tell my wife I love her every day and I caress her hand, right, every day for an entire year versus one where I'm don't do anything all year, but then we have one incredible vacation where with a lot of margaritas and all sorts of great things are happening, right? But it's only over a 2-day period, which is a deeper emotional bond. The year that I spent where every day in dribs and drabs, I'm telling her that I love her in new and interesting ways, right? So the same is true with webcomics. It's why Brad releases all these little snippets every day. He's got something new on Patreon to show because it builds the relationship with these people. So I'm actually anti-binge in terms of releasing a comic. Hey, if you're listening while you work, take a minute to stand and stretch.
And while you're doing that, we're going to tell you why you should join us on Patreon.
When you do, you're going to get hours and hours of podcasts that we've recorded just for backers.
And exclusive Patreon posts that go even deeper on ComicLab topics.
And access to our exclusive Discord server, which is a thriving community of professional cartoonists.
So you can support the show you love and get tons of actionable resources for your own cartooning.
And listen, if you can't swing a pledge this month, we get it. No worries.
Yeah, listen, you can still support the show by rating us wherever you get your podcasts.
Just leave a 5-star review and a few kind words.
That, along with mentions on social media, is incredibly helpful.
Now, everybody, let's talk comics. So, Brad, I have a very deadline and schedule alert update for everyone, which is that for those who have listened to the show for a long time know that I am a huge fan of the Alaska Robotics mini-con and comics camp that takes place in Juneau, Alaska. It is a 4 or 5 day affair where cartoonists from all over the world, last year the farthest was from Japan. We also had Mexico. We have a bunch of Canadians, a bunch of Americans, that all come into Juneau, Alaska. We do a little mini con to recoup some of our costs. And then we jump on a school bus and go out to an old camp way outside of Juneau. It's out in the woods. It's super isolated. And yet you have the creature comforts of a shower and a bathroom and a camp chef. And we teach one another classes, and it is a damn delight. And it's also just a great way to recharge and unwind because there is no cell service and no internet. So you literally have to entertain yourselves with drawing games and with all sorts of great conversation. I delight in it. Anyway, the applications for the camp are November 18th. They are due, which I think as of the airing of this show should give you about 4 days to get in your application. So just Google Alaska Comics Camp, because by God, you're not going to find anything else if you Google Alaska Comics Camp. And if you do, let me know. That'd be fantastic if there's another one. But I will tell you, it has been the last 2 or 3 times that I've gone the best days of my year. I love it so much. So that is my update for today, Brad. And then jumping us into our next question, Brad, this one comes in over at patreon.com/ComicLab, and it is about drawing reactions to Q&As. Hi, Brad and Dave. On the topic of draw it once, get paid for it multiple ways, how do you both feel about drawing Q&As for Patreon exclusive content? I think it's a really great idea for cultivating community engagement. However, I don't know that it could exist anywhere outside of Patreon. If you're drawing reactions to people's names and questions, it probably couldn't go in a book, for example. Is this a non-issue? Do either of you even offer your exclusives outside of Patreon and other formats? What if Patreon implodes and you have to move this content behind a paywall on your personal site? Are there legal concerns there? Are there other unforeseen hiccups, like a question asker down the line second guessing their name being involved for whatever reason? I guess I'm just not sure about the flexibility of this kind of content. Thanks for all that you do, Brad. So, Brad, this is a person that has a Patreon account. Their patrons probably once a week or once every couple of weeks come in with, I would imagine, live questions. And then the artist, in a fun and delightful, engaging way, responds verbally as they're drawing physical reactions to it. What are your thoughts of that in general as a Patreon service?
I think that sounds like kind of a fun thing to do. I don't know that I would be good at it, but I could see this being everything that the question asker says it is, right? It's good community building. It does create good content that you can post later. Now, and by the way, I disagree that this person thinks that it might not be good book material. I think this is exactly what you offer as never before seen, at least, never before seen by the general public.
Right.
A bonus material for your book, although you're going to have to do a little bit of writing along with it to give us the context. And that means while you're doing these, it's a good idea for you while you're in the moment to jot down some notes so you don't have to go back 6 months later and take a look at this drawing of a clown juggling herring and try to say, okay, what was the prompt for that? What were we talking about? So I would encourage you, if you're thinking about reusing this later, and I think it's a good idea, to jot down some notes. As far as legal concerns and all that, you mentioned using people's names. Do not use people's names. That's a real problem. And it's so easy to avoid that problem just by not saying people's names. Just by saying, on this day, the topic or the question was blah, 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 and here's the drawing. And then, and you can kind of build that into even an ongoing, in the same way an illustrated novel hands off back and forth between prose and image and prose and image. You can do the same thing and build those into a whole conversation, depending on how you order them. They could even have like a logical sense to them, a little story in their own way, right? So I like the idea. I'm not worried about what happens if Patreon implodes and you have to put those behind a different paywall, because this is not, other than the fact that you're going to use them as a fun bonus in a book at some point, this is not what you're building your career around. No. This is a fun thing that you're doing as community building, and you're trying to find ways of, as you noted in the question itself, you draw it once, get paid for it a few times, and you're trying to build that out. But to spend any time like what's going to happen if Patreon implodes, well, then you've got bigger problems than this. You'll do something else. So I want you to focus on this as a community building thing. I want to encourage you to consider it for bonus material for a book or anything like that, or even build those into an e-comic that you can offer. That would be fun. There's lots of ways that you can reuse this material. I think you've got a great idea. I think it's got lots of potential to it. I don't want you to use people's names. I do want you to think about how you're going to narratively weave these into a bigger thing that'll be fun to read. I think that's a good challenge. But aside from that, I say you've got a winner for an idea here. I say go full steam ahead.
Yeah, so I have one very substantial difference from Brad on this. For the most part, I will co-sign what Brad says, but let me sort of start from scratch, because I think my answer is slightly different in one substantial way, which is, do I think that this activity for Patreon, at Patreon, on Patreon is exciting and fun? Absolutely. I think it's really fun.
Yes.
Do I agree with Brad that he would be terrible at this? Yes, because it's so funny to watch Brad try to talk and draw at the same time. Do you remember a couple of weeks ago, Brad, we talked about hair cutters that can't cut hair while talking, and or dental assistants that can't clean teeth while talking?
Yeah.
Oh my God, I say this with love as a friend. Watching Brad try to host a live stream, he's like, well, that's a great question. Pen goes down. Let me answer that for you. And then when he's done with answering, then the pen comes back up. Someone asks something, pen goes back down again. It's like, Brad, you can walk and chew gum.
No, I can't. That's why I got to keep my hair short. The gum goes into it. I've got to constantly look out for that hair.
So anyway, especially both Brad and I will agree, though, if you're good at this and it's something that brings you joy, by all means, do this for Patreon. What a great way to build community. How fun. I think at a different time in my life, if I wasn't, for example, if I didn't have kids at the moment, I would do it more often, because I would just have, it's fun. It's fun to talk and draw and show people your silly little drawings. So that's fun. But I will have it, and I also agree with Brad that don't use any names. Never use a specific reader. There's no way in no world that the quality of a live drawing is going to replicate their image such that you could ever get in trouble for that. I guarantee you're not going to be like, hey, that's me. No, it's not. It's a weird cartoon version of you. So if you avoid names, you avoid all the problems, right? So, but Brad and I agree on that. Here's the one thing where Brad and I do disagree, but it's only slightly, which is, I personally feel like somewhere between 70 to 90% of this content is probably going to be useless in terms of reusing in a book. But I think even Brad would agree with this. The 10 to 30% where you talk about your characters or the drawings in the Q&A or about the plot or the story or reactions to it, that can absolutely be fun backup stuff at the back of your book. Extras behind the scenes, tidbits about how the sausage gets made or about why this character did XYZ in chapter 4. Those kind of things that are specifically about making the comics and the comics themselves. I think that's usable material. I don't know that any reader going to buy the book 2 years from now cares about the joke that you made at a reader's expense 2 years ago on a live stream, and I think you intuit that as well in the way you phrased the question. So I think, broadly speaking, Brad and I, for the most part, come down pretty much identically on this question.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. You mentioned walking and chewing gum. I've got so much gum in my hair from doing that. At one point, I had to take it all off. I looked just like famous bald actor Vin Diesel. From the forehead up. Everything below my eyebrows looked nothing like famous actor Vin Diesel.
Well, I would tell you, Brad, I was listening to famous comedian Dave Chappelle, also bald, and realizing that where were we at the beginning of the show that all of our references were from 19...
It all started with your freaking Telly Savalas. Now, listen, here's a question, Dave. Let's take this idea of live streaming and let's take it beyond what this question asker said about, doing a reaction. Let's talk about any kind of live streaming that using for community building. My question to you, Dave Kellett, is this a stronger Patreon reward, or is this a stronger thing to do for in the public for free as a way to bring people into your Patreon? It stronger? Which is the stronger use of some kind of live streaming? Is it for community building or for audience building?
What a great question. Listen, I can see an argument both ways. My sense is this is a bigger slice of you than you want to give out normally, and I would say this is a Patreon exclusive. But I can see an argument that once every couple of months you do a live stream saying, you'll get this on the regular on Patreon when you join us, that kind of thing. Yeah.
I honestly don't know. And I'll tell you why I bring it up. Picardo TV just announced that they've got a shop now where you can buy stuff. They have like an online store. You can put your stuff up on their store.
Picardo TV, is that the one that's owned by famous bald former Microsoft executive Steve Ballmer? Is that the one?
I believe it's either him or famous bald Amazon executive Jeff Bezos.
Oh, yes, Jeff Bezos. I think Jeff Bezos was really recently reading the biography of famous bald world leader Mahatma Gandhi. Is that right? Yes.
No, you're thinking of Winston Churchill, who also had very little hair. Oh. might also be considered as a famous bald
that's funny. That's
person.
The kind of reaction that I would expect on famous bald TV producer Larry David's show, Curb Your Enthusiasm. So yes, keep going with your point though. Yes.
Okay, so but the reason I bring it up is that since Picardo TV very open to NSFW, so I'm like, I'll give it a try. Any place I can go to try to find a little bit of some new audience. So yesterday I was experimenting with doing a Patreon exclusive commission that is going to be seen no place outside of Patreon but Patreon until it finally goes into a book on Picardo, where I got just a couple of people looking, it wasn't much. But I guess what I'm asking is, like, I viewed that as much more of a audience building thing And with the idea that, hey, here's an inside look at a commission that you could see the final of if you were on Patreon. Or if you like this art style, here's where a couple of the books are to be bought here on Picardo. And I guess that's why it's on top of my mind right now, is that I don't know whether... I think I had, by the way, true story, 3 viewers I gathered with my red hot. And by the way, you're right. I had to turn my microphone all the way off because I knew if I tried to talk, I'd never get the illustration done. And I got a lot of freaking shit to do right now. So I couldn't do that. But... oh, yeah. And they've got some people doing music. If somebody knows how to get music, so if somebody wants to take Grandpa by the hand and just tell me how to put music.
People, they had lights and flares and they had animated GIFs and there was music. I don't know.
I thought I was so cool figuring out how to do a transparent PNG, like the frame. But then they're doing music and somebody's got to take Grandpa by the hand on this one. I'm starting to age out of some of this bullshit. But listen, all I'm saying is, I guess for me, it was like I could see this as a more powerful audience building thing than a community building thing. But then again, having that direct access to you where they can say, like, okay, watching me draw a commission, that's audience building. Talking to me while I draw something that's a direct reaction to what you're saying, that's community building. That belongs on Patreon. You see the difference?
I guess,
there's one that's generic and there's one that's direct access. Am I right about that?
Yeah, broadly speaking, yeah. I mean, I could see different personalities pulling off either of these approaches, either using a broader social media approach or a Patreon approach. But in general, I want to revisit this phrase that you zeroed in on that Brad and I use a lot because it actually it has a specific meaning. The draw it once, get paid for it multiple ways.
Yeah.
This, broadly speaking, is not a phrase that we use when we talk about our dashed off sketches or our improv sketches or stuff that we did on a stream. That's drawings that took upwards of 1 to 3 hours. That's what we're saying with that. Like, hey, Brad has an eBay piece or a commission piece that he drew, and it took him 3 hours to draw it. He's going to work that into Patreon over time, and then he's going to work it in onto his book as a backup drawing. He's using that drawing that he spent 3 hours on 3 different ways and getting paid for it, in a sense, in different ways. We're not saying, hey, everything that Brad draws has to get paid multiple ways. That when he was on the phone with the doctor's office the other day and he was sketching on the back of the phone bill, you don't have to use that sketch. You don't have to use these Patreon sketches. Not everything is a shining gem is what I'm getting at here. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
What we're saying is the ones that you put effort into, that's where you want to at least have a mindset that tries to get paid on that same drawing multiple ways. And even there, you're going to find that sometimes the commission pieces or the eBay pieces or the dashed off drawing, even those ones, even though your mindset is, I got to get paid for it multiple ways, you're not going to always have a chance to use them all. All right. There's not everything gets to get used multiple ways. Sometimes the commission is just a commission and you can't use it anywhere else. You'll try, but that's what I'm getting at there.
I agree with what you're saying. But I love the enterprise. I love the way this question asker is thinking. I love the juice that's behind that. It's like, if I'm going to do this, I want to find a way to make use of it as much as we can. All of the entrepreneurship behind that.
Yes, agreed.
Question.
Yeah.
I agree. I want to encourage that. What Dave is saying is right. Some of these are just going to be, turds. Although as a fair count,
turds. I didn't say turds.
I thought I heard you say turd. Oh. I thought you said turd. Oh. Well, some of them are not going to be great, right?
Yeah.
Although I will say, I'm not like trying to be contradicting. But you and I also know that sometimes the stuff that you dash off is the stuff that your audience responds the most to.
That's true.
So you can't, because you were making a big, 3 hours and everything. And you're right about that. What you're saying is right. But also, don't forget, sometimes that thing that you just crapped out in 15 seconds is the stuff they go ape shit over.
Yeah, that's very true. And sometimes you can't predict that at all in terms of what both Brad and I have had comics that we were either tired or crapped out, or we were on the road and had a drink, and the writing, for whatever reason, it sold better than anything that we worked on for weeks and weeks and weeks. So yes, I agree with you on that.
Yeah.
But anyway, I also want to say I appreciate the entrepreneurial mindset that's saying, like, I am drawing these things. How do they not go to waste? Or how do I best make use of them? And that is actually keeping yourself on a swivel and keeping yourself on your toes in trying to make as much money as possible from your art. Which, by the way, is something that Brad and I support with a good, wholesome way. There's not some Machiavellian thing. It's perfectly fine and lovely to draw something once and get paid for it multiple ways.
Yeah. So, Dave, I've got another question from one of our Patreon backers who says, this is going to be an interesting one. How can I overcome comic paralysis? If I write the story or the script down for a comic strip or for a longer story, I can't seem to get it to the drawing stage. If I go straight to the drawing stage, then the writing falls flat. As the all-wise comics llamas, I'd appreciate any help you can give. Thank you so much. So, our question asker says they're facing comics paralysis. If they write it, they can't draw it. And if they start drawing, they can't write. What's going on here?
Okay. More importantly, before we do anything in terms of the question, can I just say I love comic llamas? I'll take that all day long. I'll take that all day long and twice on Sundays. I love comic llamas, so feel free to use that again anytime you'd like. Comic llamas. I don't even know how to parse that, and I love the sound of it. Comic llama. Why do I love that? It's got a good mouthfeel. Comic llama.
That ama at the end is very pleasing.
It's very satisfying. Comic llama.
The rest of the show is just going to be Brave and Dad just saying comic llama into the microphone, like we turned into ASMR over here all of a sudden.
It does remind me of that Bolshevik leader for Russia, Vladimir Lenin, the famous bald guy.
He
loved to be referred to as a comic llama. Anyway, so to answer this question, this is a unique one because I feel like this might be specific to this person. Yeah. And I'll tell you what I mean. I feel like, Brad, that, like, you know how we've asked ourselves in the question in the past, and you can ask it of yourself as you're listening to this. Am I a cartoonist that comes from a drawing tradition and I happen to write? Or am I a cartoonist that comes from a writing tradition and I happen to draw? All of us tend to come from one or the other more than the second, right? And so we get better at time. Like I came from a writing perspective, and slowly my art has gotten better over the decades. And I think Brad is the same. But we also know artists who they came from a drawing background, and slowly over the decades, their writing has gotten better. I suspect, Brad, that this specific comic paralysis is coming from they are great at the art. They love the art. The art is the joy-filled part of the process for them. So anything to do with the writing a little bit makes them seize up emotionally, you know?
Yeah.
That's my gut. Do you think I'm wrong about that? I guess it doesn't matter. What's your answer, I guess, is the better way to say this.
I honestly don't know. I don't know that I am getting the same. I don't know that I'm reading the same tea leaves that you are on the question. Like I'm really trying to find some of the truths that are hidden in between the lines of this question.
Right.
And I don't know that there is one. Although I do say, I will say this, it sounds to me like if you offered this person an opportunity to divorce themselves from the writing completely and to just draw what somebody else had written and handed to them, they might jump at that.
I think so too.
Just based on what I'm seeing here in a few short words, right? My guess is that they would like to divorce themselves completely from the writing side.
Well, and to extend that thought, I also have just the slightest feeling that maybe they don't enjoy the marriage of words and images. They might love writing, and they're very satisfied when they have written a page and it's done. To them, it is finished. Why go any further, right? And they might love the act of drawing, but they don't really want to marry words to it. They just love to draw. And so it might be the case that they think they want to be a cartoonist. They might be an essayist and an illustrator, you know, and just don't want to marry the two. That might be part of this.
So here's the deal. Without trying to find the hidden truth, what advice can we give this person?
Oh God, yeah, I know.
Because I mean, it comes down to this. We've got a person who's trying, other than to say, you know, put your pen down and walk away, or pursue a different interest. What could we possibly give this person to do to get to the other end of this problem? And particularly, what I'm seeing here is like, okay, here's the deal. I write the story for a comic, but I can't get to the drawing stage. If I go straight to the drawing stage, then the writing falls flat. Well, here's the problem. Only one of those is a proficient way to work.
It's a logical way to work. Yeah, exactly.
Right?
Yeah.
If you do the drawing and then you try to find some writing to fit the drawing, you're going to chase your tail for an awful lot. You're going to be running in circles.
Yeah, that only worked for the Marvel bullpen because you ostensibly had, and luckily had like 3 or 4 of the best comics creators of the 60s and 70s making that work. And even then, there were a lot of stinkers in the Marvel method. No one talks about it, but there was a lot of chaff in there among the wheat.
There was a lot of chaff among the wheat, right? So and we're not talking about brainstorming, by the way. So where we've often, just before so I don't confuse you, we're not talking about brainstorming where you start doodling and then you get an idea and you develop it and you write it. That's it. What we're talking about is doing a drawing. For the idea of a finished drawing, and then you try to write something. And what I'm trying to say is only one of those would I encourage somebody to use as a strategy, and that's the first one. So with that in mind, Dave, their problem is they write something and they're having trouble getting to the drawing stage. How can we help them through that problem? What strategies could we give them that would enable them to overcome this?
Right. So, first of all, I just want to co-sign and underline Brad's right. I can't in any way endorse the second route of like, well, I just want to get to the drawing, because how do you know if the next panel needs to be an exterior, an interior, a close-up shot, a pullback shot, or a shot involving a duck? You have no idea what needs to be done because you haven't done the writing yet, right? So you don't know what the dialogue is. You don't know what exposition is being laid out. You have to write it first. So I agree with Brad on that. So knowing that that's the only logical way that you do this, but once you write a page, you're like, I don't want to draw this. I don't feel like drawing this. I kind of now want to draw a harder line in the sand. You might be a writer. You might want to be in comics, but just write comics. You might not want to draw comics. That might come off harsh. It's not at all. People have had wonderful careers. Ryan North lives a lovely life and is a lovely human being and writes incredible stuff and doesn't draw. There's a bunch of people from Marvel and DC that write incredible stuff and don't draw. So that's a valid life. I mean, is it possible, Brad, that if they're repeatedly writing a thing and going, well, that's done. I mean,
Now I've lost my excitement over it.
Yeah.
Listen, okay, so let's put that up on the whiteboard here.
Yeah, that's one. That's option one.
Number one.
Option one is you might just be a writer.
And by the way, I could see that going the other way too, is that maybe you're just an artist and you don't like the writing part, right? I could see it going either way, although I think you're probably more close, but it clearly you don't like both sides of how this is working,
right?
Or it's not. There's something that ain't fitting. I don't want to tell you what you like and what you don't like. So number one, maybe you're just a writer. Number two, what if we told this so what if we fell back on some advice that we always give people when they write and see if it doesn't fit this situation as well, which is maybe you need to let some time go between writing and drawing. right?
Yep.
Because you've written something, you've wrote it. Now you got to draw it. And I could see ostensibly somebody saying, oh my God, let's say it took you a day to write the script. And now you're like, oh, finally that script is done. It took me so long to get it to where it was what I wanted it to be. I've rewritten it 100 times.
Mm-hmm.
And now I got to draw it. Oh my God. I'm so done with this concept. I'm done with the characters. I don't care anymore. I don't care what they're doing. I've spent an entire day on it. And you're overstimulated with this one moment in time that you put down on your sheet of paper. That is going to be a page or a strip.
Yep.
And now you've got to go down. Think of it this way, Dave. You're Sisyphus pushing the boulder up the mountain. And that's just the writing
I believe
part.
it was bald, by the way. Wasn't Sisyphus bald?
Sisyphus, famous bald mythology figure.
Famously bald Greek guy. Yes,
famously bald Sisyphus. He gets the rock all the way to the top of the mountain, and then it falls all the way down. And now you've got to do the drawing part. And now you've got to push that boulder up the mountain again. Right? Yeah. What would happen if you let some time go between that? And so when you come back to it, it's not something that you've been overwhelmed with the previous 24 hours. You've let some time go, and now it doesn't feel like you just got done pushing that boulder up the mountain. Now you got to push it again. Now it's a new thing for you to push up. What would happen if you let time be your friend in between those two moments?
That's great. Okay, so up on our whiteboard, we have number one, the option is you might just be a writer. That's number one. Number two, Brad's great second option is maybe what you need to do is introduce time as part of your process, because that will reinvigorate you with the excitement of creating this thing. You might just be exhausted by the time you get done with writing it. So that's number two on our whiteboard. And I would like to add a number three onto the whiteboard, or the whiteboard rather, which is that maybe you need to train your neural pathways such that you say to yourself, I don't get to write unless I commit to drawing this page. So if I in any way give up after writing this page, then I don't get to write for another week. Or you know what I mean? Like you make it painful in the same way that you kind of have to tell yourself as a functioning adult, I don't get to cook dinner unless I do the dishes. I have to do the dishes because it's part of the process. I enjoyed the meal, yes, but now I've got to do the dishes if I want to do it again tomorrow. So you might need to train yourself in a sort of a neural pathway way. I don't get to write again unless I draw the page that I finished before. And again, that could also include point number two on our whiteboard. You can do it with time. You could write on a Tuesday, draw on a Wednesday, write on a Thursday, draw on a Friday, or you could give it a week between each of those sessions. But you get where I'm going with this, is that you might have to train yourself that you don't get the pudding until you've had your dinner, you know?
You can tell which two guys were raised Catholic over here. The guys that rely on punishment an awful lot in their personal life. You don't get to draw until you've written.
Look, listen, if I need to get a nut in here with a ruler, we're going to get that going. Yes. So, I mean,
let me ask you this. Do you use punishment in your creative process?
No,
and by the way,
do you think drawing is punishing? I'm not saying that. I'm just saying okay. So the reason I'm coming at it from this angle is that I do think there is some truth to the idea, the broad concept of neuro-linguistic programming. The language we use about ourselves to ourselves reinforces who we are and how we think about ourselves. So if I call myself a dumb shit all the time, I'm going to start acting as though I am a dumb shit in terms of like the way I take care of myself and my self-care and all sort of stuff. So neuro-linguistic programming is important because it creates pathways for how you see yourself. And in this specific task, I'm saying you need to train neural pathways that if I write, I have to draw. I can't just give up at that point because then it's a failed process and I don't allow myself to do it again. So it's also, if you do it right, like Brad said, by adding time in as part of the process, you might come to both of those stages, recognizing that both of them are necessary and you cannot go back and do the first one again without doing the second one.
Right.
If you've allowed yourself time, it both can be joy-filled. They're not a punishment necessarily.
Right.
I'm just saying you have to train the neural pathways that if A, then B. You know, you can't do A. You have to do A, B, A, B, A, B, right?
Well, I mean, no, the only reason I mentioned punishment is that I guess, speaking of my Catholic upbringing, sometimes that's how I get stuff done. It's like, okay, if you don't do this, you can't do that.
Yes.
And that is kind of in my mind. Sometimes I do that, right? It's like, you got to sit down and get this done so you can do this other thing. And if not, you can't do it until this is done, blah, blah, blah. So I do appreciate your neuro-linguistic pathway idea. I think that, although I don't,
no, go ahead.
I'm
willing to be we're brainstorming here, trying to help this person.
No, it's harder. It's harder to make that work. You know what I mean? I at least for me, it is.
I'm just saying you can't allow yourself to go back to write the next thing until you draw the thing that came before. Like that's
right.
And that can still incorporate point 2 on our whiteboard, where we introduce time as a way of generating more excitement. But I feel like they have in their brain dissociated the act of drawing with the act of writing. Like they say specifically, if I just sit down to draw without writing, I'm excited. And if I sit down to write without expecting myself to draw, I'm excited. So I'm saying if you want a finished comic, you have to start associating the joy of marrying those two together. And that doesn't have to be a punishment, Brad. We've spent 25 years doing that every goddamn day. We love drawing and writing and making comics.
You're bristling a lot at the word punishment, and I wasn't meaning
because I'm saying what I'm saying is you have to retrain your brain to not see it as a punishment. You know.
But in my brain, sometimes I end up punishing myself. That's how my framework
is. As you
is.
should, Brad. You're a horrible sinner, and I think you.
But here's I'm going to wrap this topic up really quick by saying what we have seen an awful lot. And this goes back to a lot of conversations we've been having about, persistence and the difference between being realistic with yourself and this whole persistence is going to give me success. And so much of that, we see creative people fighting their true nature because they think they've got to be this one type of thing.
Right. There's only one way to do it. Yeah, exactly.
Right.
Yes.
And what I'm hearing you say is that there's some part of this whole writing and arting thing that isn't fitting with you, but yet you think you got to be a comic artist. And I'm saying don't fight your true nature. I'm going to take it right back to number 1 on the whiteboard there. Don't fight your true nature, whether we guessed right or not. It doesn't sound like both of these things are working for you when you do them in tandem.
Right.
So if number 1, if number 2 isn't a good fit, and if number 3 isn't a good fit, go back to number 1 and say, hey, you know what? I'm either one of these things or the other. And then figure out what that means for your creative process moving forward. Does that mean you have to look for a collaborator, take on a partner, maybe leave comics and do something else that's in your wheelhouse? But it sounds to me like you're trying to make yourself fit into like a square peg into a round hole that you're just not fitting, and you're fighting your own brain and your own creativity, and it isn't working. And so I'm going to say, consider 2 and 3. I'm going to take us all the way back to Dave's number 1 and say, consider the fact that comics might just not be the right fit for you, or at least not in the incarnation that you're trying it right
view
now.
Of comics. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
You might be a better teammate in a comic situation, or you might just be better leaving comics and going and doing something else. Is that not fair to say?
That's super fair to say. So of the 3 options that we put up on our whiteboard, number 1 being that maybe you're just a writer and an artist and they married, the two shall meet. Number 2 being maybe you need to introduce time as a way to reintroduce excitement into your process. Number 3 being maybe you need to try neural associative programming to see if you can get yourself to, in time, marry the two as part of a holistic process. Of these 3 options, I still think that maybe you are a writer that illustrates and an illustrator that writes it, but you're not necessarily a cartoonist. And that's totally fine, by the way.
Yes, it is.
By the way,
Yes, it
because
is.
what that means is, as a writer, you know how to think visually and paint a scene as you write. Yeah. It means that as an artist, you know how words and thoughts influence how an illustration could unfold, right? So both of those will inform the other and make you a better writer and make you a better illustrator. That's great. That's wonderful. So I might suggest, if we're leaning in on number one, and I like Brad, I kind of am, try writing just a short story. See if you feel completion from that, if that's exciting to you, and if you're like, oh, that's maybe all I really wanted. And by the way, writing a short story with all the tips and tricks that comics would have brought to it in terms of how you establish a scene, how you push in, how you lay out exposition, how you build a character, and then eventually your climax and your denouement, all of which comics can inform and make a traditional written short story better, I think, because you'll be what's known as a visual writer, you know? And so all the better for it. So it's up to you to listen to these three options and see what you might want to try. Maybe you want to try all three, but I think like Brad, you might lean towards number one.
Yeah, I think so too. All I can think of is those wise words from famous bald world leader Mahatma Gandhi when he once said, "You've been listening to ComicLab, the show about making comics and making a living from comics."
Well, are you sure now that was Mahatma Gandhi and not famous basketball star and broadcaster Shaquille O'Neal? Are you sure about that now, my friend?
The famous bald basketball player?
I'm going to say your hosts have been my friend Brad Geiger, soon to join the ranks of famous bald cartoonists.
Oh, yes. You better believe it. It's spreading back there.
No, I jest. The editor of Webcomics.com and the creator of Evil Inc. at evilcomic.com.
And my good friend Dave Kellett, the co-director of the comics documentary Stripped, as in stripped of all one's hair, and cartoonist of Sheldon at sheldoncomics.com and Drive at drivecomic.com.
And much like famous actor Stanley Tucci touring the world of Italy for its food and flavors, I'm going to say the ComicLab theme song is used with permission from Andy Creighton at theworldrecord.net. And this episode was edited by Matt Woodard of Woodsong Productions over at... by the way, do we know if Matt's bald? No, Matt has a lovely full head of hair.
No, Matt has a wonderful head of hair.
Yeah, Matt, congratulations. Compared to the two of us over here who are increasingly balding, Matt's doing wonderful in life. This episode was edited by Matt Woodard of Woodsong Productions over at www.woodsong.media.
And if you love ComicLab, you can rate and review the show on Apple Podcasts. You may hear your review featured on a future episode. Meanwhile, thank you for giving us those 5-star reviews over there on Spotify. You are helping getting this show out to people who don't understand any of our references.
And ComicLab is made possible by your support at patreon.com/ComicLab. So I will go ahead and say a huge shout out to all of our bald fans when I say patreon.com/Floyd Mayweather. You know, I've never watched a single Fast and Furious.
Do you know my wife loves the Fast and Furious franchise?
Okay, which of the guys is she after? That's the question.
Which of the guys isn't? She's a big Vin Diesel fan. She's a big Jason Statham fan. She loves Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson. Can you imagine how absolutely depressed she is getting into bed with me?
Well, I
don't come close to any one of those guys.
Can I say, just as a friend who loves you and longs only for your happiness, have you considered, for the benefit of the bedroom, maybe shaving the head, Brad? Maybe shaving the head?
I thought about it every now and again, but you don't know what's underneath there until it all comes off. What if I might have all kinds of bumps and blotches, and I have no idea what's going on underneath there.
It's also funny, too, because you never know what happens if you truly shave your head. We had, for our high school football team, as sort of rally caps, for our final game, we all shaved our heads, and one guy's hair at the age of 18 did not grow back.
It didn't come back?
He shaved his head, and all of a sudden at 18, he's got this terrible male pattern baldness.
Oh, no.
So I don't know if Brad, if you're going to commit, you got to commit to that. Are you ready to go down the route of Shaquille O'Neal, Brad, for the rest of your life?
I've got dents up there. I've got dents and God only knows what's going on. I think I'm covering a multitude of sins. And then what I'd have to do is I'd either have to become one of those guys that wear a hat everywhere, or I'd have to get a toupee and just until it does start to come back.
I want everybody to know that as Brad is contemplating shaving his head, he was genuinely feeling his head going, I've got dents, I've got divots, I've got...
There's a lot of stuff going on up there. Nothing going in inside, but a lot of stuff